All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Cranked and Ranked. And today we
Slayer!
I was wondering.
I had to do it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering which one of us was going to have to do that. I'm glad it wasn't me. Yes, so we don't even need an introduction. I think I said it on one of the last episodes that I'm not really going to go into who we are because you should know if you've been listening. But my name is Steven. My friend here is Eddie Sparxx, and we are going to be ranking the discography of the classic thrash metal band, one of the big four. We're talking about Slayer. I'm doing the opposite.
Hell yeah.
I'm going low. I'm an understated Slayer fan.
We're gonna need to explore like all facets of Slayer scream. So I could do like a Slayer, like a tiny little whispery one.
That sounds like the whisper from the beginning of Hell Awaits when it comes in.
Shine on.
Cool. So yes, today's episode is going to be the bottom 6. So we're ranking 12 studio albums by Slayer, and today we're going to be dealing with 12 through 7. So let's just fucking hop right into it. And as usual, sir, I'm going to let you go first. So hit us with it. What you got for number 12?
Okay, so in stark contrast to last time, where I absolutely ripped Generation Swine apart, I couldn't really find a distinctive turd moment in their discography, because to me, varying changes throughout their career, but when you get a Slayer album, you know what you're in for. But this one I had to put at 12. And I'm going to go with Undisputed Attitude. And
okay.
It's a hardcore punk covers album. For a 14-track record, it's very short, clocking in at 33 minutes. But they're punk songs, so generally speaking, they'd be short anyway. But I suppose I put it here but for the same reason that you kind of put Unplugged as the lowest Nirvana album. Because it's not really a Slayer album purely. I can appreciate that, it was kind of a nod to their influences, but I also struggled to do a track by track for this one, as like a lot of the tracks sound exactly as you'd expect, a slightly punkier incarnation of Slayer. I do like Richard Hung Himself. That was stuck in my head for days. Yeah. And I suppose I put this here because it's not a straight up Slayer album, and yeah, it's probably the shortest little segment I've ever done on an album yet.
I will bounce off of you with that because that is also my number 12. It seems very obvious. I think any Slayer ranking probably has this pretty low because it is, like you said, not a Slayer album. So if you're really comparing Slayer to Slayer, this is just a fun thing that they put out showing some of their old punk influences. And it's got a lot of energy to it. It's a very tightly produced album. And yeah, except for 3 tracks, it's all cover songs. I would say overall it's enjoyable to listen to. I remember when it came out, I played it a lot because it was just a fun, put it in your car while you're driving kind of album.
It's definitely a fun album.
Yeah, and also it's one of the rare cases where, to me, I don't know a whole lot of cover albums that have like a theme. It almost seems like covers albums are always kind of all over the place because I guess people's influences are kind of all over the place. But they decided when they recorded this because they all have very varied backgrounds and influences, but they all decided just to stick to these punk rock and hardcore, kind of songs. So that's interesting that they did do that. But I do think, even though you're saying that it is a very short album, I do think that they could have cut some of the tracks and made it an EP. Even the one Slayer song on it, Gemini, to me is kind of a throwaway track. It's okay. It's like one of those things where, all right, I like it because it's a Slayer track that I didn't hear anywhere else, but it doesn't add anything to the album. And I always have to bring up, and I know that it's been brought up by a lot of people, that I always get a little bit annoyed. I don't know if annoyed is the right word. Perturbed at their choice when they covered the song "Guilty of Being White," and they ended up by saying "guilty of being right," and that always bugs me. And I read somewhere that they claimed it was tongue-in-cheek humor, but I don't understand the humor in that at all. I mean,
I think that one aged like milk.
Yeah,
that one did.
Yeah. But to be fair, the original Minor Threat song, that didn't age very well either to me. So I give the bad decisions, it's on all of their heads, because I'm just like, why would you even do that? That literally was a choice to change the word to right, and no explanation whatsoever, except for, hey, if we have any white supremacists in the fan base, here's one for you. So that bums me out when I hear that part. But it is what it is, and I don't think you can really talk about it too much more. But yeah, so the overall, my feelings are the same as yours. So that's why Undisputed Attitude comes in here at number 12. So let's move on.
Cool. This one, on the flip side, might I'm not 100% sure, but like I feel a little bit dirty putting this one here. But at the same time, with Slayer, it was hard for me to put any one album over certain albums when I got to a certain point in the list. I've got my top 6. My top 6 was much easier than my bottom 6. So this next one will be interesting.
Okay.
I've gone for World Painted Blood.
Okay.
Number 11. I will say, I didn't dislike it, but it pales a little bit to me. I think it could be down to the production. So I'm just gonna go right into it. This is where my track by track little expertise came back into it a little bit. Okay, it opens like Rain in Blood with like the atmosphere and drums. The song specifically, not the album, because that one opens with Angel of Death. But
yeah,
it opens with that atmosphere and the dum dum, da da da. Dun, dun, kind of thing. Dave Lombardo. This is the last album with the original lineup, with Dave Lombardo on drums and Jeff Hanneman. This was actually Dave's second time around with the band, because he dropped off in the 90s and then came back for Christ Illusion, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it's one of those weird times where he came back and left again. But yeah,
and as far as I know, he left both times for the same reason, which is from all accounts, it's because the band doesn't split things evenly, financially speaking. I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems to be that's the problem, is that some members of Slayer want a bigger piece of the pie, and he's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, the opening title track, World Painted Blood, it as an opener, it's an awesome song. It's got some particularly cool sections, especially the halftime riff after the octave section. I love me some mid-tempo thrash riffs. And I also love the solo in this song, because it really opens up, and instead of a flurry of notes just sounding like fucking evil. It feels like you're descending in this portal to hell, and then it goes into a breakdown where Tom just gets more and more furious.
Yeah.
But yeah, that like dun 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 really plodding, menacing thing. Like I put out a tweet earlier this week saying, hey, I much prefer it when Slayer slows down a little bit and plays something a bit more groove oriented, because like to me the really fast Slayer stuff is cool, and when done right it's awesome, but like it can get a little bit fatiguing if you just listen to constantly. So
yeah,
when those slower sections hit and they're doing that really sinister type of scale that they use accompanied with this groove, it just becomes the most evil sounding thing. And I love it. And I'm gonna go into track 2. Unit 731 picks up the pace. It goes, at this point they go full on skank beat mode with, not the most memorable track, but not offensive to a Slayer fan's ears. I actually thought Kirk Hammett was guesting on the solo for a moment with the wah. I had to do a reality check there for a minute. I was like, wait, who am I listening to again? But I do like a nice wah solo. I think the Black album.
I do too. Like I have no problem. Like I'm one of those fans of Metallica that when the solo starts and there's no wah in it, I'm all like, oh.
Yeah. Like it gives a certain expression to it as well, because it's like,
yeah, it's like the solo. It's like the solo is talking to you.
Yeah, it's like, because there's wah, and then there's a talk box, and a talk box, like in Man in the Box, allows you to actually say words with the guitar. But I think the wah, it doesn't use words, but it still has a talky kind of expression to it.
Yeah.
Which I think is awesome, and why haters come at me.
I guess it can be overused. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think Kirk has a tendency to use it as a bit of a crutch, but all in all, I can appreciate a good wah solo when done right.
Yeah.
But yeah. Where am I now? I'm at Snuff. Snuff is a much better song to me. Evil riffs and halftime groove moments really just get me. Beauty Through Order is a slower song, and I want it duly noted. I know I've said that I love slower Slayer tracks, but this one doesn't hit as hard as I remember it, and maybe it has something to do with the fact that I played the Slayer pinball app a little too much, and that was like one of the few songs that was actually on it.
Oh, okay.
I think there was like 2 songs, and the app was released as like a promotional thing for World Painted Blood around that time, and I just thought, wow, my favorite band made a pinball game. Fuck yeah, I'm gonna play that.
Yeah, I do. Beauty Through Order. If that's the one I'm thinking of, I like how the chorus is mostly played on like the toms. Like it's more of a plotting kind of chorus, and I think that's kind of cool when they throw those kind of things in there.
Definitely, and this is the thing I like about modern Slayer, is that they're not afraid to play slower stuff, because you get slower stuff on South of Heaven and Seasons in the Abyss, but like kind of post 90s, they really brought out the groove elements, and I really like that.
Yeah.
But I will say though, whenever Lombardo breaks out the halftime one-handed 16th notes on the ride, I am in love. Oh,
I mean, there's a reason why, and I'm assuming it's not just me, but whenever I've been in bands and somebody's played something like that, it's always just referred to as the Lombardo beat.
Yeah, the Lombardo groove is such an iconic thing as well, because I've heard it used in other bands, but Slayer is the first band that comes to mind whenever you hear that.
Yeah, totally.
That beat. And it's just the fact that the right hand is going really fast, but everything else just takes a back burner, and it's like like Criminally Insane.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
such a cool song. But yeah, that's on Rain in Blood. I'm talking about
World Painted Blood.
It's one of the Bloods. But yeah, the what have I got next? I've got Hate Worldwide, another one of the more memorable tracks on the album to me.
That was the first one released. I remember before the album came out, that was the first one we got to hear.
Yeah, it's that kind of like classic Slayer with a little modern twist thing in there. You know, I will say at this point in the album, voice cracked there, sorry. I will say it's because I've been screaming Slayer too much. I've made myself really hoarse. But yeah, I will say at this point in the album, I am feeling a tad fatigued, but I still find myself putting on the stank face of groove approval whenever they slow it down, like the middle section of Public Display of Dismemberment, you know, Lombardo breaking out some subtle blasting at points too. Human Strain starts promisingly, but it doesn't do an awful lot for me, that song. Sure, it's slower, but it's more vibe than groove. And that's something I don't necessarily come to Slayer for. Same reason for Beauty Through Order. Americon is pretty much a hardcore song.
Yes.
It's, you know, politically charged, and it has that real beat down feel to it.
Yeah. That song that song is one I'm going to go ahead and do it now because I was saving it for when I talk about this album, but that is one of my favorite Slayer songs, and it doesn't really much sound like a Slayer song, but it is one of those songs, like I've said before, that song comes on and I'm cranking that motherfucker because I'm like, this is just so good. And there's something to be said about when Slayer takes a break from Satan and does some political shit. I think it's way more effective. Like sometimes the Satan thing is a little bit, I'm like, all right, guys, it's kind of dumb. And so when they do, because it's not the only song they've done that's political. They've done plenty, but when they do, for some reason, I just feel like it's a lot more, I guess because it's about real evil and not, you know, storybook evil. Well, unless you're religious, which I'm not, but still, you know. But yeah, so Americon's one of those songs I'm just like, it's just one of those ones where I'm like, I don't know. I'm assuming it was more of a Jeff Hanneman thing because I think he was more of the punky side of stuff. But God, that song's great. I'm sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, it's pitch in whenever you like. I just love this one in particular because it's different in a way that I feel fits Slayer's aesthetic much more convincingly. You know, I feel like you sometimes the Satan stuff can become a little bit wearing after a while because you think, okay, how many times can I say Satan?
Yeah.
You know, eventually you want to say, hey, you know, talk about corruption or something like that. You know? And that's a direction that really began on. I mean, I suppose like they gradually did it more and more as time progressed, especially following like Rain in Blood. You know, because those first three albums they have a very religious aesthetic to them.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like church kids shouldn't be listening to this stuff. But then eventually they started bringing in like warfare and eventually in the 90s with, especially with Divine Intervention, they sang about a lot of things that were very much real, you know, like actual serial killers and stuff like that. And I think Body Count as well came in it from the angle that, you know, Body Count with Ice-T, they always said that reality is much more scary than fantasy because, like, some crazy dude might be yelling repent on the street corner, but, you know, anyone can just pull out a gun and cap you, you know?
Yeah. But not only that, like, I think that there's plenty of really scary shit in the world that is already based in religion. So you don't need to dig that far, and I guess Slayer did also start incorporating those too, and so and I guess a lot of bands did, but it's I guess it's the more overt Satan 666 stuff that almost sounds like it's a bit of a joke, like they're doing it's a little bit of cheeky fun, as they would say in your country.
All right, mate, you're going to do a cheeky Satan next, man. like something like that. But yeah, where was I again? I'm enjoying
Americon.
I'm enjoying this one. Americon. Yeah, pretty much covered that one. Yeah. So coming back in with Psychopathy Red goes back to like the skank beat thrash Slayer is known for. Playing with Dolls feels cool and doomy, real creepy kind of thing.
As a very creepy song.
Yeah.
Also, it's I think you should probably point out, I think Psychopathy Red may have the highest Tom Araya screaming vocals without him doing that. But like the last chorus of that song, his voice is way the fuck up there. And I was always like, how did they do that? Like that dude, he sounds like he's 20 years old again. But yeah, I always love that part of that song where he goes really high.
And that's the thing, like going back through my notes, it pained me to have to put it this low. But
it's got a lot of great moments, yeah.
It does have a lot of standouts. And Playing with Dolls has that real creepy feel to it. Like I'm not sure how I feel about those like plucky high notes in the verse.
Yeah.
That's something that's always been a little bit iffy for me with Slayer. Like whenever they do that ding 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 kind of thing with the guitars. That one is okay, but the second verse definitely has like a little metalcore / modern metal influence with like the synchronized dun 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 kind of guitar chugs in there.
Yeah.
You know, I definitely observed a little bit of modern metal's influence on that little section there. Then Not of This God, final track on the album, like it tricked me into thinking it wasn't going to be as heavy as it was. And then that middle section happens where the guitar is like tuned right fucking down.
Yeah.
And the whole song, I was like, wait, where did this come from? But yeah, all in all, it's not a Slayer album that I would reach for, but the parts that stand out really stand out. And like, to me, it's mostly the breakdowns and grooves. The faster stuff on this record kind of blends together for me, really. But functionally, it has to be there to make the slower stuff really punch when it does. But that's my take on World Painted Blood at number 11.
Awesome. So I'm not going to be able to piggyback off of you this time. Because my number 11 is the 2006 album Christ Illusion.
Ooh.
So I kind of second your feelings about it. Like when I was trying to order these, I had to start being super critical because other than that, with Slayer, they're pretty consistent overall as a band. And so when listening to this album again, which this is the album I've listened to the least since it came out. And when I brought it up again, I think it's probably at least been a couple years since I listened to it. And as soon as I got like halfway into it, I was like, oh yeah, this is why I'm not into this album. So obviously it's noteworthy because it was the return of Dave Lombardo after a couple albums being absent, I guess 4 albums being absent, something like that. And so you had the original lineup back once again. And it's almost like a Slayer kind of just doing a Slayer thing. There's a lot of really similar riffs, and when I say similar, I don't even necessarily mean on the same album. I mean like riffs that I feel like maybe I already heard in a different Slayer song, and this brought up like a concept that I would like to give the title of riff blur, where when all of a sudden you're hearing these riffs and you're going, this sounds really similar to something else. and you realize that a lot of the riffs revolve around the same notes. I'm mostly referring to like verse riffs most of the time, but it just seems like it starts to become just a muddied mess of fast chugging riffs around similar notes, and I guess it's hard to add a lot of a variety to when you're doing things that way. So the big problem with Christ Illusion is the fact that when listening to all of their shit, this album just doesn't stand out. Like there's no big tracks on this album or riffs, like you have a South of Heaven or a Rain and Blood or War Ensemble. They all have things about them that stick out and you'll remember it. But Christ Illusion is it could just be one song with cool moments here and there, but not enough to make it an album that I seek out to listen to. Now, on the same note, as I was listening to this, and I always have to remember, people that are your age or even younger, that if this was their first Slayer album, it's pretty fucking good. Like I would not, if somebody said, I want to get into Slayer, I bought Christ Illusion, I'd probably be like, great. That's good start. Just, keep going from there. But the fact that nothing new was brought to the table, and the fact that really like what Christ Illusion was after, God Hates Us All, I believe, was the one before this one.
Yeah.
And it just seems like, prior to that, I feel like they had brought different things to the table, even if it was just slight tweaking of things here and there on all of their albums. And this was the first one where it was just like, plop, here's a Slayer album. And so it just doesn't really do it for me because of that. So that's why it's here at number, what did I say? Number 11, Christ Illusion.
Fair enough. I would say that, there's a couple of standouts on that one for me personally, but I do get 100% the riff blur theory, because I began experiencing that after, marathoning these albums. But yeah. So number 10 for me, excuse me, number 10 for me is going to have to be Diabolus in Musica.
All right.
Now, this one is often cited as the time Slayer went nu metal, and I don't feel like that does it justice at all.
On certain tracks, I think it does.
oh yeah, I'd say there's some moments, and I'll get to those.
Yeah,
but I would consider it more of a groove metal album. But good Lord, Bitter Peace is heavy. That's a pretty killer way to open a record.
Yeah.
That one really makes a statement. And, as far as that slow, groovy side of Slayer goes, this one's up there, for the slow, more kind of Slayer stuff in contrast to the tremolo pick stuff.
Yeah. There's something to be said. I mean, we'll probably say it 1,000 times. There's something to be said about slowing things down. Sometimes it makes things sound more evil and heavier than the fast stuff does.
Definitely. And then followed it up with Death's Hand. It has a cool time change at the end. I love that. I think, again, this is one of those records I haven't spent a lot of time with. I think I've maybe listened to this album 2-3 times max in my life, and those other 2 times were a long time ago. And the third track, Stain of Mind, it gives off a real Sepultura Roots vibe. It's okay, but it's not memorable. That's the thing I have with this album, is that there's good moments that stick out, but there's a lot of parts that are just forgettable, and that's why this one's down here. Overt Enemy has that kind of feel I like from this era of Slayer. I spent the listening of this album. Also, it's probably important for me to contextualize the mindset I was in when I was listening to this album. I I'd pretty much entered all of the cheat codes on San Andreas, and I just went on a killing spree while listening to this album. And it's pretty good, Rampage music. I can't lie. It's good for just grabbing the minigun with infinite ammo and just going around and just blowing everything in your path to pieces. But I would definitely recommend pairing Slayer and an album. Slayer and a game where you can just go full on God mode, because it's a pretty good experience. Yeah. But going back to Perversions of Pain, it has a slightly more classic Slayer feel, high speed sections especially. Then Love to Hate comes on, and this is the most nu metal track so far. It feels almost rap metal at points. And even the title, Love to Hate, that sounds like a Slipknot kind of title. Maybe even something like Korn.
Yeah.
It really does have that kind of vibe to it. Then Desire begins with one of their evil, menacing, clean parts before building into this plodding chugger of a song. And then In the Name of God got a decent metal face out of me, that kind of like forced angry frown that, certain songs get out of you whenever it hits right. Scrum, vicious thrash track. A criticism here is that they do the same kind of things in a lot of songs. And the song Point closes out the record with another groovy track. It's okay. I don't find this album as repulsive as some do. And I can appreciate that at the time, you're talking 1998 when nu metal was really coming to the forefront.
Yeah.
I can imagine this alienating a lot of their 80s fans in particular. Because if you did grow up on songs like Black Magic or War Ensemble, Love to Hate is gonna freak you out. You're gonna be like, "What the fuck happened here?"
Yeah. But it's a thing that to me, and it doesn't happen often in the album, but the one thing that happens where it does really connect it to that nu metal side of things is that Tom Araya occasionally will do those sort of soft whispered, really close to the microphone Korn vocals.
Yeah.
I can't even do it, but it's like the weird, I guess Slipknot does it too. And for some reason, those vocals just annoy the fuck out of me. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. Everyone cups the mic and does a little softly spoken thing, like they're almost crying into the microphone. And I was
going to say, so you're not a fan of the whole like, "Mommy,
well, I mean,
kind of thing.
when Korn does it, I feel like they invented it.
Yeah. They can kind of own it.
So if Korn puts out an album and that doesn't happen, I'm all like, all right, Jonathan, what the fuck's going on with you? Are you getting happy or something? But I don't have a lot to add. That album will come up later in this episode, and I'll talk about that.
Cool. Okay, that's my pick for number 10.
Cool. My number 10 is their most recent and last and final album, Repentless.
Ooh.
Which is the album that came out after Jeff Hanneman died, and he doesn't play on it. They have Gary Holt instead, and I love Gary Holt. Gary Holt is probably one of my favorite rhythm guitar players. Like he writes some fucking really great riffs, and I love Exodus. But despite the fact that there are some really fucking good songs on here, like there are some good standout tracks. Overall, it feels a little paint by numbers Slayer, and there's the riff blur thing going on a lot on this album. And it just feels a little bit phoned in to me. Like, I don't know. And honestly, it's hard to, like, if you're not really close friends with the people that make these albums, you don't really know where their heads and their hearts were. So I don't really know if they just were doing it to get a last album done, or if this was a thing where they were really trying to forge ahead at first and continue the band. But it feels more like the latter to me. This is a good time for me to bring this up. I'm hoping it's not just me. On many Slayer albums, I can barely hear Tom Araya's bass.
Yes.
Most of the time. And it's never really bothered me until I really noticed it. And I think it was listening to Seasons in the Abyss where I started to be like, I don't even hear a bass guitar. And this album does the same thing, which is fucking funny because you have all those people out there that are like, and Justice for All sucks because you can't hear the bass. And then they'll be like, Slayer! Yeah. And I'm like, okay, dude. I get it. So that kind of bums me out that you don't, because it feels missing. Because I have a pair of Beats headphones, and Beats headphones increase the bass. And you still don't hear the bass guitar very well in these songs. So that's just a gripe that I have about many of their albums. But it's a very small gripe because it's one of those things that I've gotten so used to that sound where the rhythm guitar is king that it doesn't really bother me that much. But so in the end of things, or I guess wrapping up this album, I really do think that World Painted Blood is a much better last album, and they should have just left it off there. I love that album. This album, it's a little bit underwhelming, but I will have to say, under the circumstances, if you don't have Jeff Hanneman and you don't have Dave Lombardo, I think this is the best last album they could have made. So yeah, I'll give them that much. So, but overall, it's one of those albums that I'm pretty damn sure when we get 10 years down the line, I'll probably forget songs that were on it because I won't go back and listen to it. But once again, when we're talking about younger Slayer fans, if this is their intro to Slayer, it is not bad at all. So, it's just one of those things where albums got to go places, and you start to have to really pick out those weaknesses in the album. And I think Repentless has a good amount of weaknesses. And so that's where it is at number 10, Repentless. I don't know why I said it that way.
I'm just going to chime in with that little thing about the bass. Something I noticed that really weirds me out is the fact that I think the only album where you can distinctively hear Tom's bass is the first album they ever did. If you listen to Show No Mercy, that bass is right there.
Yeah.
And like especially in something like the intro to Black Magic, for example, with the you can hear the dum 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 underneath, and I'm just thinking, how the fuck did they get an album from 1983 to have more bass than an album from 2015 in an era where metal is so reliant on low end in the mix at this point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you could say that Diabolus, there's a good amount of bass in that. Like you hear some bass on its own in that album. But yeah, you are right. But it is really interesting, and I'm assuming it was a choice because it happened on multiple albums. So,
it might be like it might be something of a callback to Rain in Blood. I haven't re-listened to my top 6 yet because I've been solely focused on these 6 records. Yeah. But I knew where those records were going to sit on this list. But these ones for me are the ones that I would consider lower down. So I focused on these more. But to my recollection, I don't recall much bass being on Rain in Blood. I could be wrong. I'm
you could also make the argument that Tom Araya probably just plays rhythmically right along with the rhythm guitars, and that's fine. For a band like them, I think it's fine.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a very guitar-focused band anyway, with the whole speed and shred thing. So I very much doubt, especially Tom being the vocalist, that people are going to be paying much attention to the bass. in like Slayer's case, because you got two shred guitarists, you got a wicked dude on drums, and then you got Tom Araya out front, and you know the bass is not the focal point of him. He is the front man, so people are more focused on him as the vocalist. But I think I need to remind myself sometimes that Tom actually does, you know, have an instrument in his hand.
Yep, he totally does.
Cool. So number 9, we're at number 9, right? Number 9.
Number 9.
Number 9. 2 number 9s. Number 9 large.
I was doing the Beatles off the White Album.
Oh.
Number
I was
9.
doing a Big Smokes food order from GTA San Andreas. I reckon we should.
that's a reference that went way over my head.
I think we should insert a little clip there of basically Big Smoke is this big fat dude, and he goes through the drive-through, and everybody else in the car wants like one meal, and he goes off on this like tangent where he wants like 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda or something like that. I have played this game that many times.
I'm just interested in a fast food joint that has 45 different meal options.
And it's taken me 13 years to notice that. But yeah, you're right. But yeah, number 9 for me is going to have to be Christ Illusion. Okay, so this is the first album with the original lineup since Seasons in 1990, so that's 16 years apart. It is a return.
Wow. Jeez, I didn't even think about that. That's crazy.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like I got thinking there for a minute. Imagine being out of a band for 16 years and then being back there. That's got to feel strange.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. 16 years out of a band. Wow. I just realized what I'd written there. It's like 16 years is you know, most of my life at this point. So yeah, wow.
I mean, that's a good amount of time that you think, you know, people change. So you would think that like maybe that's what happened, is it 16 years of distance, and then, you know, I guess your outlook on things changed a little bit, but not that much, because he then left again after 2 albums. So
right on. Okay, so back into it. It's a return to more of a straight up thrash sound, and I feel as though this album has better production than World Painted Blood. I felt that World Painted Blood felt, you know, to me, perhaps a little bit compressed. It did feel a little more restrained than Christ Illusion does. Christ Illusion feels a little more open and dynamic than the album that followed it. And I'm going to go straight into the track by track with Flesh Storm. So this one begins the album with like a modern take on Slayer's more thrash-oriented side, and the sound that they would continue on the next 2 albums. Catalyst follows it up with the same kind of thing. Skeleton Christ is my favorite track so far. That awesome triplet groove, and that the breakdown at the end sounded to me very Pantera-esque.
yeah.
Especially like the first part. And then Eyes of the Insane is okay. It doesn't stand out on this record to me. On the flip side, Jihad is one of my favorite Slayer songs, and the rant over that sinister guitar part with the double pedal, like just going at the end, that sounded to me like one of the most evil things Slayer have like ever written. And you know, it's important to note as well that song is sung from the point of view of the terrorists on 9/11. So that is a particularly one of those reality songs that really hits a mark that's like, holy fuck, you know.
It's like, we got real evil out there for you guys to sing about. Let's do it.
But yeah, and Conspiracy is chaos and speedy thrash done right. And then Catatonic starts, and it's like full-on sludge metal. And again, like Americon I'd mentioned previously, this is one of those Slayer tracks that doesn't sound like Slayer, and it's fucking awesome. And I feel as though had Slayer done more exploration, they could have had a more diverse but equally consistent catalog, you know, because unlike Metallica, who did a complete branch out in the 90s, Slayer have done what AC/DC did, and pretty much done a variation on the same kind of thing. I know they did jump out of the thrash thing a little bit with Diabolus, but aside from that, they've very much retained. They've never not been playing Slayer, so
yeah,
that's definitely something they've carried right through their career. Black Serenade, rapid and sinister song. Cult carrying on that same fast and evil sound. And then finally we have Supremist, which climaxes the album with one of the most visceral tracks on the record. And I gotta say, like, all in all, I'm impressed with this album. And I was surprised at its quality that I hadn't paid it more attention in the past. Especially knowing about, like, songs like Jihad and Cult. You know, I always knew those tracks, so it struck me as surprising that I hadn't listened to the rest of the record. But I do definitely get where you're coming from with the riff blur thing, because I really do think there are only so many ways you go before it, you know, becomes. It's like that little conversation we had about death metal in the Nirvana episode, about the constant blast and quick stuff, and it's like, if you just, like, you know, throw in a little meaty slowdown part there, you know, I'd be much more into it than just that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, gotta say, I liked this album. I don't think I've really had any experiences with any of these albums where I thought, you know, let it end, or, you know, I was just like, I was worn out after listening to them, but that's what Slayer does. It's a very athletic sounding style of metal, because it's just constantly running.
Also, I think it's probably important to note that I don't think that Slayer ever fell victim to the thing that all sorts of bands were doing, where you were making an album that was 70, 75 minutes long. I think that most Slayer albums tap out at around 40 minutes, maybe a little bit over. But I think that that's a smart move on their part most of the time, because it's like, I don't know. We'll talk about this a million times probably. I just think that shorter albums, picking your best songs, that's usually the way to go. And I feel like Slayer most of the time manages to do that.
Yeah, I feel like it's better to leave the audience wanting more than to play so long that they become disinterested. It's you know, you don't want to burn them out. So, you know, especially when you think about Rain in Blood, that album doesn't even clock in at half an hour. That thing is like 29 minutes in length.
I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, it's in the 20s, but it's one of those great examples of, this is enough album. You don't need, you've given enough. It's almost like they gave an hour's worth of material in less than half an hour. So, you know, you just nip it in the bud right there and move on.
Definitely. And I think a lot of the fact that Rain and Blood is so short, just gonna say this now, is probably due to the speed of all of the songs, because they all kind of do what they need to do in a pretty concise amount of time, you know, with the exception of, you know, Angel of Death, which kind of goes on a journey. The rest of the songs kind of have this theme, do a little tempo change there, come back to it. Yeah. That's the song, done. Next song, go, repeat kind of thing. But, you know, that thing was a game changer at the time. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, well, that'll be an album that we'll both obviously be talking about next episode.
Definitely. I'm gonna try and keep all my points on that one reserved. But yeah.
All right, so my number 9, moving on, unless you had anything else to add about Christ Illusion.
Nah, not really much to say. I think I've got one thing to say about the artwork. I think it was at this point that Slayer started kind of doing 2 covers for their albums. Like with God Hates Us All, there's 2 covers. There's 2 covers for this one. And then I don't know about World Painted Blood, but I think there was one. But I think it was a case of on God Hates Us All, it was originally a Bible with nails in it and blood spattered on it. And then they changed it to that white thing with the crosses on the front. And then for Christ Illusion, they had like a rotting green Jesus hand with a hole through the middle of it. And then there was that other cover for it of kind of that like almost Seasons in the Abyss kind of thing going on.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, especially with God Hates Us All, I think that the original cover was inside the new cover. Yeah. So you would open it up and it would have the real cover of the album, which I'm assuming Christ Illusion was probably the same thing.
Yeah.
All right, well then let's move on to my number 9. My number 9 is the 98 album Diabolus in Musica, if that's how you say it. And so, yes, this is one that I think a lot of people may put way lower than this on their list, just because it's such a 180 for Slayer. And yeah, it does have a lot of slower tempos. It's the most the widest use of slower tempos of any Slayer album.
Definitely.
But as we've talked about, using the slower tempos does really highlight the faster parts, because there are a couple faster songs on this album, and I think it just makes them more powerful because of all the slower parts. And yeah, to me, the new metal influence is all over the place. Just the down-tuned, really simple riffs. And some of the riffs are very generic sounding. I will have to say, and I did a podcast episode on this where I talked about new metal and about how some of it, a good amount of it, nowadays to me actually sounds pretty cool, because that sound didn't necessarily continue to happen over and over and over again. So some of it to me, I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting, because it's now this sort of different era of metal that is very unique to a particular time. I know some bands are doing it now too, but not in the same way, I don't think. And so when I hear some of these songs on this album that have that real new metal kind of feel, I'm like, this is actually kind of cool, because you don't hear this a lot anymore. And at the time, I get it. It was kind of an attempt to fit in, maybe, for Slayer. Yeah. Although I don't think that they would ever want to do that. So that might be selling the album short, and it may just be that, you know, they really wanted to strip down and do something slower, and it just so happened that all these other bands were doing similar things at the same time. But to be fair, like, I just like that it's something different. I don't mind the experimentation. In fact, I welcome it and I love it, and that's why the album isn't, you know, dead last on my list. And honestly, Slayer's take on that style of music makes for a pretty interesting listen. And so it is pretty enjoyable. I think at times it almost sounds a bit clumsy. Yeah. Almost like it's the musical equivalent of trying to fit into somebody else's pants that were tailored. The pants were tailored for them, and you're putting them on. And sure, you look pretty good in those pants, but you could look better if they were made for you. And so I feel like it's just a little bit of ill-fitting when it comes to the sound. And so yeah, some of it hasn't aged well, some of it has. But really, when it all boils down to one phrase for this album, I would just have to say that I appreciate the experiment, and I don't think it should be shit on the way it is by some people. Obviously, it's not that. The weird thing is that this album doesn't get as much shit as some other bands' left turn kind of albums, but I do think that overall it is a quality and well done album. So there you go, number 9.
Cool. Yeah, pretty much covered everything I'd say about that one. It's a good. I feel like of all of the bands, like, because if you think like the big four, I think Saint Anger is the main one that people point out as like the worst, but that's because Metallica is the biggest one. So you're always going to have people jumping on the hating on Saint Anger bandwagon. But then, this album here, to me, while a lot of people would put it very low, even at the bottom, I don't think it deserves to be shit on in the same regard, because I think in a way Slayer managed to incorporate the sounds almost like influence more than trying to fit in a way.
They didn't change their look. They didn't pull a Machine Head and all of a sudden start rapping and spiking their hair and coloring their beards blue or whatever the fuck. You got to give them that. I think that it was an honest influence. They were like, I'll say this all the time about albums like this. I think that they were probably friends with a lot of those bands, and it was just that bleed over of like, this is what's going on, and this is the music we're listening to, and it just seeped into the theme of what we decided to do for this particular album. So, to me, it just seems honest. So, that's great.
Definitely. Sounds good. So, coming in at number 8, I've gone for, drum roll, Divine Intervention.
Wow, okay.
Now, I've put this one here, and this is the area where I would say I'm getting into the albums now that I would reach for. I would kind of lay out my Slayer albums. At this point, it would be just kind of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Depending on which mood I'm in. But I will say, upon re-listening to this album today, it has moved up a spot. It was below Christ Illusion, and it's gone up. And I think it's important to state how much happened within the time period of 1990 to 1994, because Slayer didn't release any studio albums between Seasons and Divine Intervention. So you've got the years of 91, 92, 93 where shitloads changed in the landscape of rock and metal. Glam gone, grunge has risen, but Slayer remained Slayer kind of throughout, even though they didn't really put anything out. I mean, I know they put out Decades of Aggression, the live album, but Slayer never really fell into the I don't want to say like polished kind of area of 80s metal, but there's a distinctive production shift from the quite reverb heavy. I mean, there is a little bit of reverb on Divine Intervention, but the mix on Divine Intervention sounds completely different to that on previous albums. And it could have been produced better. The guitars at a lot of the points in the album sound like I'm listening to the record through a pillow. They sound a little bit muffled, as if like the drummer and the vocalist are in this room and the guitars are being played next door. I
feel like there was a lot of odd choices made in the mix all over the fucking album.
Yeah, it's a strange one. And at points, Tom is quite quiet. I found, and it's one of the strangest mixes on an album that I've heard in metal, because I can't tell whether or not it does the album justice or not. Does it make it feel?
I think a lot would say it doesn't.
Yeah, I was going to say, does it make it feel rawer? And then I thought to myself, nah, it just sounds like it was mixed badly.
Yeah.
But yeah, nonetheless, they stuck to their guns. This is the first album that they did with Paul Bostaph, and he is awesome. He is just as awesome as Dave for me. I mean, Dave is the iconic one, but Paul definitely does a great job behind the kit as well. And yeah, they went for more concepts based in reality on this album. This is where Slayer's kind of social awareness kind of came into the forefront. I mean, I know they'd talked about, like, you know, warfare and things like that, but on this album that they'd pretty much, you know, funnily enough, the album's called Divine Intervention, but the album is actually very much real in a lot of its topics. And I'm just going to go right into the tracks. Cool. So it's got some great stuff, a little forgettable filler here and there, but aside from that, I feel like this is a strong effort. Killing Fields right off the bat shows the first distinctive departure from 80s Slayer, you know, with its emphasis on opening the record with more of a groove. I mean, there are thrash parts, but it does have that kind of thing going on.
I think that song in particular, that's one of those examples of how the slower parts make the faster parts really pop. So once you get into the faster part, especially at the end with the "Now you're standing in my killing field," like, I'm just like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing. I totally love that song, but I think that's why it works so well, is because they don't just give you the full thrashiness, you know, all at once. It's sporadic or whatever. But yeah, I love that song.
And the thing that really won me over with Bostaph was his double kick on Sex, Murder, Art.
Wow. I have to interrupt you.
Ooh.
Because I feel like, for the most part, and this started in 1994 for me, and it still is there today, I feel like his double bass playing is sloppy. I hear mistakes. I hear mistakes and I hear inconsistencies. And sometimes it feels like it veers off from the guitars slightly. And that always bothered me. And now that you're saying this, I'm like, maybe is there something fucking wrong with my brain? Because I don't hear that when Dave Lombardo does it. But I hear it on pretty much every Slayer album that Paul Bostaph plays on. Funny enough, though, on other albums he plays on, it's not as obvious, and maybe it's because he's not utilizing the double kick so prominently. But I always hear what to my ears sounds as missteps in his double kick, and it's interesting that you're saying that. So I didn't mean. This is one of those things where I'm like, it's so weird to hear somebody say that his double kick was great. Because I'm like, all right.
I would say, like, there is kind of like a human element to it. So it almost feels like it's on the verge of derailing, and it's that, like, unsettling nature to the playing on this album that I think I'm tuned in with.
Don't get me wrong. I would rather it be what he's playing than the fucking triggered, inhuman sounding double kick any day.
Oh God, yeah. Did you check out that video of that dude who'd managed to, like, hook up a quadruple pedal system? And,
no, you have to send that to me.
And he managed to. If anybody didn't watch any of the last episodes, I might have mentioned it on here. There's this dude out there that managed to, like, make a quadruple pedal setup where he basically had these, like, single doubles which you can double kick with one foot, and he'd applied them to two separate drums, if I recall correctly. And when he really opens up, it just sounds like an A10 Warthog firing its gun, where it just goes like like that whole, like, sine tone.
It's like your phone vibrating or something.
Honestly, that is exactly what it sounds like. I actually reached for my phone one time. I listened to it because it was like, it really does sound like that. But yeah, like I would say it's the unsettlingly almost about to fall apart nature to this album that I think appealed to me in a different way. You know, Lombardo is my favorite, but I think the slight sloppiness on here does lend itself to the rawer sound on this album. And going on to track 3, we've got Fictional Reality. You know, brings a triplet kind of feel, which is nice and refreshing to hear once in a while, because Slayer, while they do play phenomenally fast, they are very straightforward rhythm wise. It is, you know, buka 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 buka, that kind of Bay Area polka kind of thing going on there. But totally. Then it goes into Ditto Head, which is one of the most visceral, punishing tracks Slayer have ever written.
That is up there with my favorites.
You know that. You know, it's the fact it starts off like he's just absolutely ranting over this absolutely blazingly fast guitar work.
That's also something to be said about Tom Araya, is that he was able to spit out really fast, like, vocals with a lot of syllables.
Yeah.
And keep it on. Like, I never felt like he was off beat. Like, you know, you go back to like Hello Waits or whatever, like where there's a lot of words all really quickly. And that's the thing that's great about Ditto Head. Ditto Head is this really fast song, but no part of me thinks that these dudes are going to lose it at any point. It is like masterfully done. And it's such a great song.
Insanely tight song. Like, this is why I feel like in another universe, had Tom Araya taken up hip hop, he would have been a pretty sick rapper. I'm not going to lie. His syllable work is, you know, if he can, you know, yell that fast, surely he's got to be able to. He's got some rap chops hidden somewhere. I'd love
Maybe
to see
that's
him.
That's what he's going to do now. He's going to take a break, or he's finished. He's finished with Slayer, and then once he's done with his break, he's going to come back as a new hip hop artist. So
that'd be brilliant. And then we come to my favorite track on the album. Divine Intervention, the title track, is my favorite song here. It could be a contender for, you know, one of my top 10 Slayer songs. Yeah. It almost feels like a villainous grunge song at times, and that clean section before Tom comes in is ear porn to me. If you listen to the Nirvana episode, you all know I have an unhealthy infatuation with the chorus effect. And if you don't know what the chorus effect is, it basically doubles the signal of a sound and slightly offsets it to make it sound really sexy. And Come As You Are by Nirvana is a perfect example of that. And I could listen to a whole album of grungy chorus shit and be completely satisfied.
Well, that's when they were developing the chorus pedals for the first time. That's what they were saying. Like, how do we make this sound sexier?
Yeah. But anyway, now I'm done filleting the chorus effect for this episode. We move on to track 6, Circle of Beliefs. Now this is a pretty standard fast Slayer track. You know, not much to say, but it's Slayer doing Slayer. SS3 keeps that theme going. Serenity and Murder is one of the few sing-along moments on this album where, you know, Tom Araya actually does a melody with his voice on this one instead of like the yelling that he's been doing for most of the album.
Yeah.
And
which is, I remember that was one that I heard people gripe about because he was singing on it, and I was like, he sang on the, I mean, do you remember Seasons in the Abyss? Yeah. He sang on that song. It's, I don't know. It's weird that people nitpick things without really thinking about what a band has done in their career.
Yeah.
And so like, I'm all like, I don't know. I think it's a cool moment in that song when he does the sort of low singing in that.
I think the funniest thing as well is when they call out like, I think one of the funniest things I love to do is look at early photos of thrash bands and see what they were wearing. And they would go on to reject the whole makeup thing. But if you look at like Show No Mercy era Slayer, they've all got eyeliner on. You know, granted it's more in the vein of, you know, extreme evil looking stuff than drag, but still they wore makeup. And nowadays, even post Rain in Blood, it's hard to imagine a world where Slayer goes on stage with makeup on. I mean, I know Kerry King goes out with like that gauntlet thing with nails on his arm, but
to be fair though, if you spend a lot of time braiding your beard, I think that's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, you reach a certain point where it just becomes a different version of
it's still hair and makeup at some point, you know.
But yeah, going on to 213, this has another chorus effect moment. This reminds me of something that I would hear a MIDI version of in the original Doom games, you know, kind of released around the same time. This feels to me like being on a, you know, platform descending into an arena to fight the cyber demon from Doom 2. And it's just like that real dun 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 was almost like doom metal to me, and that's what really made that song pop out to me. I just thought, this is evil. This is something that if you know played it to your parents would probably shit themselves, because they'd be like, holy shit, is this what my boy is listening to? But yeah. And then Mind Control is the savage final track, and it closes out the album with a vicious flurry of Slayer doing what they do best. It's an underrated record, but I hold a lot of other records in their catalogue to be of a higher standard, so that is why it came in at number 8. But
cool,
definitely a strong record.
So this is the most interesting episode I think we've done so far, because we're so not in line with each other on our lists, and it makes it much more interesting. So my number 8 is God Hates Us All from 2001. So I'm going to start this off with a little story. The day that God Hates Us All came out, which was September 11th, 2001, I remember waking up in the morning, and my girlfriend at the time was staying over, and she was like, we should turn on the TV, turn on your TV. And I'm like, what, why? And obviously the September 11th attacks had just happened. And I think when I started watching the news, both planes had already hit the buildings. And it was weird. It was a very weird time in America, probably, you know, I don't know, for everyone, no matter what your political beliefs are. But all I remember was I was a little bit freaked out, because I was like, it was almost unreal, and I was like, this is fucking weird. Like, are we gonna have a war that happens over here now? Like, what does this mean? And even with all of this anxiety and confusion and fear, I still left my house to go to the record store, because I was like, I'm going to buy the new Slayer album today. So I went to the record store, and I bought God Hates Us All, and I remember thinking to myself, what an appropriate album title.
It's spooky.
So it was one of those things where I was thinking in my head, and I wish that I could have somehow been a fly on a wall with the Slayer dudes when September 11th happened on the day their album came out. And just like, do you worry that it's going to hurt your sales? Is it going to boost your sales? Like, what the fuck? You're already a band that's under scrutiny from parental organizations and shit anyway. So it was such an interesting day and time. And so that album will always obviously have that feeling for me when I play it, because you like I got into my car, the CD went into the CD player in my car, and you hear the song God Hates Us All, which is up there with one of my favorite Slayer songs. It is heavy. It is no bullshit. And it sounds like a song that would have been written after they saw the September 11th attacks. Like they would have been like, we got to get this feeling into a song. Here it is. And I was just like, how the fuck is this so perfect? How is this album and especially that song so perfect for right now? And so that being said, the album is heavy as fuck. I would say it's the most aggressive Slayer album they made.
I would agree.
To me, it's just balls out, extreme, and it pretty much never lets up. And one of the things that I do like about this album is they didn't do a complete 180 from Diabolus in Musica because there's still a little bit of that nu metal tinge in some of the parts here and there. So I like the fact that they didn't just turn coat and be like, no, we gotta do classic thrash metal again.
Yeah.
But it does have a lot of thrash on it. It has a lot of fucking killer tracks, and it's a band firing on all cylinders. But this album is where the riff blur begins for me. This is the first album that they put out where I started to hear riffs and think to myself, I think they did this one already.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of that on this album, but fortunately I think there's enough of a variety of approaches and twists in the songs that keeps it from being rehashed sounding. But when you get to an album like this, unfortunately, it stands up against a whole lot of classic albums that to me have aged very well. And I think this may be their longest album because it's the only one that I've ever listened to where I thought maybe it could have been a couple songs shorter. Because I do think there's a little bit of filler on it. But only in comparison to other songs on the album. But yeah, so the reason why it ends up, at number 8 is simply because it has some flaws that keeps it from seeming like classic Slayer. For like this seems like, post, like I don't know, everything like Diabolus, if I'm even saying that right, was almost like the turning of an era for Slayer. It's like the midpoint for me. And then God Hates Us All is like we're full on into the second wave of Slayer, and that's when things start to just seem just not as vital, I guess.
Yeah.
As their earlier stuff, but. That being said, that's just me trying to explain why I put it here at number 8. Because if you're taking the album on its own merits, it is heavy as fuck. It's really good. And my gripes are real minor, but it had to go somewhere, and it ended up here at number 8. So that's my spiel.
Cool. I just want to state as well, like just cycling back to the release date of the album. I was, how old would I have been? I would have been 3 when 9/11 happened. And, as a toddler in Britain, I had really no idea, to be honest. If I looked up at the TV and saw 2 burning towers, I would have thought, oh, this is a movie or something that, my parents are watching or some shit. But, when I think for you or anyone, especially living in America at the time and being old enough to know what was going on, it must have been scary as shit, especially it being on American soil.
Yeah, it was scary, but so just to briefly talk about it since we're on the subject, it was a horrible day. It was a horrible event. It was tragedy. It's one of the worst things that's happened in American history. But for me, as a music fan and as a metal fan and as a fan of I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I'm about to get slightly political here. So the pendulum in America by the late 90s, even mid 90s, had swung very left.
Yeah.
Like the overall feeling that you got from America was we won't accept racism or sexism or homophobia. We're moving forward, folks. And 9/11 seems like the part or the thing that happened where all of a sudden the fucking pendulum started to swing way the fuck back the other way. And I think our country regressed like fucking crazy. And we're obviously still dealing with it today. I don't want to go any further into that because it's just my own personal political opinions. But I do feel like that was a moment, and that's why that thing is that moment. It feels even worse to me because I'm like, man, we were doing so well, and so I fucking hate the people responsible for it. Even more so because I'm like, not only did you kill so many fucking people and just destroy a part of our, I guess, our security, feeling secure in our own country, but also you started a wave that brought out all of these awful people that all of a sudden we're just coming out of the woodwork. And I was like, oh, I didn't think we had this many of them.
When I remember the name of the girl who did it, but there's a YouTube video called Protest Music in the Bush Era, and that was a really interesting watch. It's like a 40-minute video. Maybe link it below if I can find the video.
Okay.
But I watched it recently, and it was a good watch. Just to see what happened to music during that time. It was an interesting time, but I also do think that the protest music around that time did not have the same feeling of accomplishment that 80s era or 70s era protest music did. It seemed still a little bit watered down. That's why, Green Day does American Idiot. I'm like, nice try, guys. Yeah.
Anyway, so we've gone way off track, but still, it was a weird time, but also it's very interesting that Slayer was there.
Yeah. Right on. So that brings me to, is this the last album of this episode?
Yep, we're on our last one.
Okay, so my number 7 pick, I've gone for Repentless.
All right.
Okay, so going now, this actually ties into a little bit of a I know we want to steer away from that because we don't want to bum our listeners out, but this one also ties into a little bit of a terror attack story. So this album came out right when I was in college, and I saw them a couple months after this album came out, and they were amazing live, and I really enjoyed seeing songs from the album live. But if you remember back in 2015, 2 months after this came out, I had gone to see them live days after the Paris Eagles of Death Metal thing had happened.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
So, on a slightly somber note, something I distinctly remember was that I was slightly on edge at the beginning of the show because I thought, it'd be so easy for someone to just run in and take me out, at the time.
Also, maybe my perception of when events happened is a little sketchy, but also I think around that same time, wasn't there something in the UK where somebody drove a car into a big group of people on a bridge or something? It seemed like there was a lot of those things happening around the same time all over the world, it seemed.
Yeah, funnily enough, I played a gig that day with my college band, but I think that was 2 years later. That was the one.
Okay.
I think that was the Westminster Bridge one, where the dude mounted the curb and took a bunch of people down. But yeah, it was a terrible thing. But yeah, something I distinctly remember from the... because I saw them at Plymouth Pavilion, and had the terror attack had happened days prior to me seeing Slayer live. You know, the Eagles of Death Metal concert where most of the people were killed in the attacks, and it really shook, you know, every music fan to the core, because they thought, you know, just even I think Kerry King even chimed in on it, and he said, "I am amazed it took them this long to attack a rock concert." You know, because really, there's been concert tragedies in the past, but generally they've been accidents and, like, you know, stage crushes and things like that, and maybe things collapsing, and, you know, not a deliberate, you know, attack. But I remember seeing the colors of the French flag were projected onto the curtain before the band came out. And that's just my little story about seeing Slayer around that time. And it much like God Hates Us All coming out on 9/11, this thing related to Slayer for me in my own life happened around a significant tragedy. And enough about the sad shit. Let's get on to the music. So this is the final album that they did, studio album that is, and Exodus is Gary Holt is on guitar, along with Paul Bostaff back on drums following Lombardo's second departure. And the album intro gives me goosebumps and takes me right back to seeing it live back in November 2015. Delusions of Savior going into Repentless is fucking sick. Like, the production on this, the production is much better on this record, I feel, than its predecessor. Take Control, typical fast Slayer track. The mid-tempo part towards the end had me headbanging, you know. Vices has that slower, more sinister feel from Slayer that I adore. Nonetheless, the flurry of double kick under that groove is delicious. Cast the First Stone, that's another groove one. Me likey, you know. I'm much more likely to headbang to stuff like this than, say, Necrophobic, for example. You know, the feel of these tracks, like this makes me want to do that face that Doom Guy makes when he picks up a new weapon. We'll insert that little image here.
You'll have to send that to me.
I will do. But it's a face I find myself making whenever a really, you know, angry and evil Slayer part comes on. It's just that kind of thing. But then it's followed up with When the Stillness Comes. You know, again has that slow feel. This one, however, you know, boils over gradually. That opening clean part is ace. But when shit really goes off, all I want to do is just demolish a skyscraper with my fist. You know, I really like this album because of, like, how meaty it is in parts. For me, I approach this one more from a groove lens than I do a thrash lens. So, you know, Chasing Death feels hardcore in places, and those like screams he does are like a great little addition too. You know, whenever he does that, it just makes me laugh, but in like an evil way. So it's like, yeah, I think Slayer really, you know, with their scale choices and how they play, really capture that feel of menace and capture a level of darkness that I feel a lot of other thrash bands just capture the aggression. They don't actually scare you. Whereas, like, a lot of the harmony choices and, like, riffs that Slayer plays, I think, fuck, you know, whoever wrote this has got some dark shit in their head. Because if they can conjure up, you know, this combination of notes, you know, they're in the right hands for this kind of thing. Yeah. And like there's very little skank beat thrash on here, and it veers more into groove territory. And honestly, on this one, I'm all for it. You know, that being said, Implode incorporates both, which is cool. piano wire again hitting me with that, kind of evil groove that seems to be a little bit unique to Slayer. It's very evil and menacing. I know a lot of other metal bands can capture that, but Slayer have this way of doing it that's so uniquely them. Because I don't think I can think of any other bands that sound like Slayer in the way that they can conjure up that feel,
Yeah.
People can play thrash and they can play fast and they can play, crazy stuff. But I think just the sheer combination of all of the elements that make up Slayer really set them apart from, the big four and, thrash in general, because they're always known as the darkest one,
Yeah.
And Anthrax is the fun one. Megadeth and Metallica kind of straddle a line. And then Slayer is, straight up evil, It's almost like villain music. And, Atrocity Vendor feels punky and brutal. That kind of skank beat, otherwise known as the Bay Area polka, is prominent here. You Against You has a wicked dive bomb in it. Big fan of dive bombs.
I do have to admit that I think that song title is pretty laughable.
Yeah.
Atrocity Vendor.
Yeah, I thought Atrocity Vendor, that song, it does feel a little bit tongue in cheek, that one there, because it's like, I'm trying to imagine picturing it in my head, and I've just got this like vending machine in my head that just dishes out tragedies.
Yeah. or a guy getting off the back of a truck with a box of some atrocity.
So what would you like today? Genocide or war or But then I think at the end, You Against You has the wicked dive bomb in it. Like I said, I just huge fan of dive bombs. Approaching the end of the record, this one possesses a kind of hyped up feel, preparing you for the end. And then Pride and Prejudice is just crushing. I fucking love this hardcore side to Slayer. Brutal way to close out the record. I'm actually thoroughly impressed with this record, and it kills me to have it this low. I think on Repentless, you and I got some differing takes on this one.
For sure, yeah. That's it's keeping it interesting.
But yeah, all in all, I enjoy this record, and I think of the lower end, this is probably the most likely for me to pick up. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. So this choice may be controversial. I don't really know. My number 7 is Show No Mercy from 1983. The debut album from Slayer. It's a stone cold classic. I think that era of thrash, the first couple years that the bands were getting going, it's so enjoyable to listen to how the music was unfolding when it was this kind of new thing, and each band's sort of different take on what would end up becoming, the thrash metal sound. So before I say anything else about this album, talking about why I have it so low, which I guess some people might think it's low, before I say any of that, songs like The Antichrist and Black Magic are so fucking good that those alone almost made the album higher, especially Black Magic. That's the beginning riff of Black Magic is one of those things that starts and there's such a classic, eerie vibe to not only just with the notes, but the way that the riff is played. It's an odd time. There's an odd rhythm, not a rhythm, but I don't know what to call it. But it's not straightforward to me. It's an interesting riff that they start playing, or I guess that'd be more of a guitar melody. But still, those two songs, I guess you could say "Die by the Sword" also.
Die by the Sword.
Just such classic fucking songs. So aside from those songs, though, a lot of this shit just sounds like what other bands were already doing, and some bands were doing better than this album. It's a lot. There's a lot of '80s mid-tempo metal on it, like not thrash.
You can
Stuff
definitely hear the new wave of British heavy metal influences in there.
Yeah, there are, like, it almost seems like it has more in common at times with the first Anthrax album than it does with Kill 'Em All. And that's a good point also about this album, is the fact that it's produced too soft. I guess that's a good point to me. In comparing it with you have to compare it to Kill 'Em All, just because that was the beginning of the whole shit. Kill 'Em All has a very raw and heavy and aggressive vibe to it, whereas Show No Mercy, it's a little bit rounded off at the edges quite nicely, where it's not too heavy. But you did make an interesting point about the bass guitar being prominent, which that is a thing about this album. But I really do think that it's a good album, but it is a band that is in the process of carving out their niche in the thrash metal world, or whatever. You know, I don't even. I guess at the time they were considering it thrash metal. Was it even called that at that point? You'd think that I would know these things, but I don't know. I don't know how quickly they started calling it thrash, but it clearly was a vibe that a lot of bands were picking up on very quickly. And so, yeah, the production is very 80s sounding and not very heavy. And then the big gripe for this album is the fact that some of the songs just kind of blend in with other things that were going on at the time. So even though you do have a lot of fucking classic shit on this album, you also have some other stuff that's like, it's pretty good. So that's really all I have to say about this one. It's one of those albums that I can't really argue with its classic status, and I really enjoy listening to it. But in the grand scheme of things, with the albums that we will get to, it's just not as good, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Fair enough. I would, I'd probably say the same things as you. Black Magic, such a good song, and that is definitely top 3 Slayer tracks for me. Black Magic, and the first time I heard Black Magic wasn't on the album. It was like a live music video of Rain in Blood.
It was Rain in Blood, yes.
And
I love that transition where it gets to the part at the end of Rain in Blood where on the album it goes to that really fast part. But it literally just went right into the chugging, and then they go into the riff for Black Magic, and I'm like, oh, that's so fucking good. That's probably the first time I heard that song too.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on, it was either Kerrang or Scuzz TV, and I remember watching it, and I was like, what's this? The video said that this was Rain and Blood, Are they going to go do that fucking nuts thing they always do at the end of Rain and Blood? And then it just kept going, and it was like do. The kick started coming in, and I thought, and then he goes into that.
Oh God, it's so good.
And I was like, is this like a non-album section of Rain and Blood? Like, and like my kid brain at the time was like, could they not fit this on the album? And I'm like, in hindsight, I'm thinking, dude, Rain and Blood's one of the shortest fucking metal albums. They could have fit a whole other, 30 minutes on that thing.
Yeah.
But that song is one of the first Slayer songs that I really fell in love with. And all of this, it's such a strangely structured song. And am I correct in thinking that there is a major section in it as well? Like
there is. It's a variation on the. Well, it almost seems like it changes key 2 times.
Yeah.
In the song, like a pre-chorus or something like that.
Yeah, it's one of those cases of like, it's such a chaotic song, but it's so coordinated at the same time that it's, you know, if the song Black Magic was a person, I would not fight them, because this thing is a fucking behemoth.
Yeah, this one, that's it. That's the weird thing about putting the album, you know, in the bottom half, because just thinking about that song alone, I'm like, that's one of my favorite Slayer songs. But yeah,
definitely.
So we did it. We did the first half. I do find it fascinating that 2 of your bottom 3 are in my top 3, or top 5, top 6. 2 of your bottom 6 are in my top 6.
I didn't even think about that at the time, and now I'm processing that. This is one of the more interesting lists that we've done.
Yeah, so that just means all of you out there will just have to tune in next week or whenever we get the next part out. Hopefully, it'll be next week. Unless you have anything else to add, I'll send us out.
Another great song on Show No Mercy is Metal Storm, Face the Slayer. That thing. Yeah. That part.
Yeah.
Blew me away when I first heard it, because I just thought, try and say, like, I had at the time, like, a bunch of kids giving me shit for being into metal and stuff, and they'd always be like, oh, rock and metal is stupid and talentless, blah, 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 right? And I, like, came in the next day blasting it, and I was like, all right, play this, you know?
That's literally, I used to really get bummed out. I had some friends that would make the claim that death metal, you didn't have to have any talent to play death metal. And I would always show them that video of Cannibal Corpse doing frantic disembowelment in the studio, and you can't even follow their fucking fingers. And I was like, no talent. Okay. Anyway, but that's for another one when we do Cannibal Corpse.
Awesome.
So that wraps up the first half of our Slayer Cranked and Ranked. Thanks for listening and or watching. If you're on YouTube, comment down below and shit, and go subscribe to Eddie Sparxx channel on YouTube, and if you haven't subscribed to mine, Old Head, do that as well. So we will see you all next time for the bottom half, or I guess you could say the top half of Slayer. And so without further ado, take us out, Eddie.
Later, dude.